Um, so first, I I would love to introduce Mala Singh, the Chief People Officer at EA. And we also have Fran Dunaway from Tomboy X, the CEO of Tomboy X, and Ruchika Tulshyan, the CEO and founder of Candor. Hello, hello. And then shortly, Adrienne will be joining us.
So do we kind of, as Adrienne enters the stage, do we want to start beginning? We had a great prep call, which I missed, but there was some incredible conversation. And Adrienne is here, so I will let Adrienne take away.
Get on with the panel. Let's talk about resilience, because I feel like we are living it in the moment, ladies. If everyone wants to open up your workbooks as well, your session workbooks, we've got some information in there, and I would love for you to follow along and enter your own answers to these questions as I pose them to the panelists. So starting with the concept of endurance, I like to pose this as a contrast to resilience, because a lot of times we say resilience, but what we're actually doing is enduring. And so I put the definition of endurance in the workshop notebook, but essentially it's that ability to withstand hardship. You know, we recognize and celebrate people for their grit and determination. And yet, sometimes it's not necessarily the best approach. And so what I want to do, though, is give space for acknowledging what we're enduring at the moment. So I will ask both of you, what are you enduring at the moment?
I'm happy to start. And apologies, okay. It was my technical issue that caused those audio problems. So sorry, everybody. Just one of those mornings. I'm enduring technical issues. How about that? Now, I think, you know, in my role as Chief People Officer for Electronic Arts, I have the honor and privilege of leading the company's response through the current pandemic situation, which currently involves 95% of our people working from home. We're an employees, we're a company as strong as about 14,000 workers all across the world. And today, only about 5% of our workers are working in an office. And so we like to say we moved from what used to be 47 offices to 14,000 offices, and everything associated with that, and everything that our people are going through. So the role today is very intense. It's been a really tough 2020. We started with the crises around the pandemic, and then it evolved to issues around racial justice. And then today, we have a lot of anxiety and just risk of divisive conversation in the company associated with the election. And who knows what comes beyond that. There's the natural disasters, the hurricanes, the wildfires, typhoons. And so in my role, I feel like I'm enduring a lot. And just outside of that door are 3 children that are schooling from home, in the kitchen, the dining room, and a fold-up table in the living room. And so as a professional and a mom, I just can't imagine what more this year could give us to handle. But it's been interesting for sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure many people here can relate to that, all the different places where we have a lot to endure. I'm so glad Fran has joined us. I would like to pause on this question and introduce Fran, and then give Fran and Ruchika a chance to answer the question as well. So Fran Dunaway is joining us. Fran likes to call herself the accidental entrepreneur. In 2013, she had a great life as a partner in a media strategies firm with big budgets and lots of vacation time. So that led Fran and her wife, Naomi Gonzalez, starting a side business, because they wanted some cool button-down shirts. They picked the name Tomboy X because they thought it was cute. When the name started to resonate with women and girls around the world, my daughter is one who also resonates with the term tomboy. They know they had an instant brand. Tomboy X has since refocused solely in the underwear and loungewear market and is thriving on the fact that people of all shapes and sizes want to unite with a brand that stands for values they share. The word tomboy opens the door to conversations about being whoever it is you want to be. Thank you, Fran, for joining us.
Thank you so much. I apologize for the delay and technical difficulties.
This has been the most fun start to a panel I've ever had, I must say. So let's go to Ruchika. What is it that you are enduring at the moment?
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for having me here. What an amazing panel. I want to acknowledge that. I also really want to thank everyone who is joining in because, you know, it's really hard to make time for yourself right now, no matter what your circumstances are. And in the beginning of this pandemic, I think one of the things that I really realized is I'm not going to be able to do any of the personal development and growth and learning, or can I? Is there a way to prioritize that this year as soon as we started going into lockdown? I have a 4-year-old, so that's a very challenging age to have a child at home. But if I think about what I'm really enduring, if I go down to really the sort of almost like a cellular level, it's loneliness. You know, there's a deep feeling of disconnect from people. My family lives in Singapore. I won't get to be there, for I don't know how long. So if I really think about at the core of what we are enduring as societies, as a global sort of world that has been brought to our knees with this pandemic, it's really this feeling of loneliness, enduring that, and then working to build community together. And so I'm really, I'm really hoping to learn. I'm actually more on this panel to learn from my fellow panelists. How are you dealing with this, enduring this loneliness, finding community, finding ways to, develop and learn and grow at this really, really challenging time.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for getting a little vulnerable with us and, setting that, modeling that for everybody here. Yeah. Fran, how about you?
Oh gosh, I think change is always hard, and there's so much uncertainty that's leading us to have to change the way that we think about what we're doing on a daily basis, everything from personal to professional. But I also think that it's a challenge because of the unknown. There's so much anxiety that's just low level with all of the things that are hitting us in this epic year, and that uncertainty in terms of decisions that you make and things that you want to implement. We just hired a new COO who started on Monday. We're very excited about that, and the task is help us take some calculated risks, but also helping us make a plan for next year and how we're going to grow the business. But then, you read about Cathay Airlines, shutting down Dragon Air and 8,500 jobs lost. And you see these things, these little indicators, these little ripples around the world, really, in which there just brings more uncertainty. So how do you build a plan that gets you through the hard times, the worst case scenario, but remain optimistic about the potential? And I think that's really tricky. And then, to the point Ruchika made about the people, and there are so many people that are having to deal with kids in the other room, that are just lonely, that live alone and haven't been around anyone. And you can see it. We did implement early on, every meeting needs to be a Zoom meeting so that you're at least seeing, you have to wash your hair or comb it. And and so showing up in a way for each other, but also recognizing that everyone's having to deal with this low level of uncertainty about when it all ends. So this week we have been going into the office a little more. It was really fun, although then you have to wear a mask the whole time, and it's kind of like, well, you're only seeing them from here up anyway. So you know, how much is that doing? Yeah.
And I'm hearing things from each of you that I'm sure everybody participating can relate to. We're enduring masks, we're enduring uncertainty, and then our own reactions to that uncertainty, the anxiety that comes up for us, the loneliness from the isolation, right? Balancing so many things, you know, and the pressure of our jobs along with our families, and everything else going on in the world. With, like you mentioned, racial justice and so many things that need to change at the same time that we're in this circumstance. So when you adopt an endurance mindset, the thing is, like, that is just about pushing through, and you have to ask yourself when you're in this mindset, based on what I know about myself and knowing myself as I do, what is my sense for how long I can endure this? So this is something that I would invite our participants in the workshop here, or the session, fill this in your workbook. What are you enduring at the moment? And what is your sense of how long you can endure this? That's different for everybody. So while people are filling that in, is there anyone who wants to share their concept of how long they can continue to endure?
I kind of feel like that goalpost keeps moving, right? When we went down, you know, when we went into lockdown in March, it was like, oh, it'll be just a month or, you know, 2, 3, and now we're looking at maybe, you know, another year like this. So I kind of think that there is a sense of this where, like, there's a part of this where I think to really endure this and to really be able to make it through the finish line, we can't really set a date or a time. You know what I mean? And I'm really, for me at least, I'm finding that it, and I see, you know, Melissa in the chat talks about, you know, continue to endure it changes every day. And that's exactly where I'm at. And so I really try and think, what is the day going to be like today? What am I going to endure? Sometimes it's, you know, the challenge of really getting out of bed because, you know, we're hearing about another unarmed Black person being killed, or, you know, it's just, I'm like, how will I carry on today? And then some days it's like 2 or 3 days of where I'm like, okay, I found moments of joy. I've walked around my neighborhood. I've seen the most gorgeous tree. You know, this is going to keep me going for 2 or 3 days. So I kind of feel like that finish line is going to keep moving as long as we're like, okay, we're going to make it through today. So that's the way I'm finding.
And that's such a beautiful transition because, you know, enduring and endurance and this concept of having the goalposts moved out on us, there's something out of our control that it remains out of our control. But when we focus on resilience, true resilience is about being generative inside ourselves and having the ability to stretch, which we are all stretched right now, but then come back. Right, and be restored, you know, restore that energy and internal peace. And so my question to you all right now is, as you think about resilience as a different mindset, and you've all probably been practicing it for a long time, but especially recently, what practices have been working best for you?
I'm happy to share. So for the first time ever, I've been consistent with an exercise routine. And when I say first time ever, I'm talking about in my life. And so there's something beautiful about not having to commute anywhere. And you can't see to the left of me, but I have an indoor cycle just to my left over here, and it stares at me all day long when I'm sitting here on Zoom calls. And so that's been really great. But I also think, you know, we were talking a lot about mindset, and what I have found is super helpful. I know there are many wise people who have said that there is a gift and opportunity in every difficult situation that we find ourselves in. And so what gets me through, and a practice that I've been trying to embrace, is every day look for the gifts. Every day look for the opportunities. I, as a working mom, these last 8 months that we've been sequestered at home, it's literally the longest I've ever been with my kids continuously. I've always been on planes, traveling all over the world, and crazy meetings and long days. And I've missed big chunks of what their day-to-day life looks like. And it's just really interesting to see and overhear them in conversation with their classmates or with their teachers. There's this window I get into their worlds that I've never had before. And so I think just really focusing on those gifts and opportunities that the situation presents itself has been a really important practice for me.
Yeah, great.
And I think
Ruchika
that it's a time.
And Fran?
I think that it's just really a time of our humanity as well as living in the present. And, you know, that's really all there is. And so it's such a reminder, a stark reminder. You know, there are certainly times when we have tragedies or devastation that occurs, but it's usually a blip. And then we get back to our lives and we, you know, or we're all in it together, you know, for a moment, but then it picks up again. And this is just so long lasting and enduring that and you know, to your points of it's coming from every direction. And so I have found that it's been nicer. I mean, I've gotten to know everyone on our team, their you know, not only their spouses' names, their children and their pets at this point. And I think that that's a remarkable thing. And it's just a reminder to stay present.
Staying present and connection despite the fact that we are distanced, right? Yeah. Yeah. Mala, I can see in the chat that your exercise has been a really relevant practice. Ruchika, how about for you?
Yeah, so actually one thing that became really clear to me is if I was really going to be resilient and endure this year, I would have to connect back to what used to bring me joy when I was younger. And I think, and this is, I don't want to say it's a piece of advice, but it really worked for me. When I was young, I was one of those kids that, you know, after lights out would be, you know, under the covers with a flashlight reading. And I loved books and I would like walk and read. I read the dictionary for fun. I know I was like one of those kids. But, and then for years, I just stopped reading unless it was related to work, you know, unless it was like, you know, a data-backed book or whatever it is, the latest research. And this year really reminded me, you know, and I almost had to go back to that 12 and 13 and 14-year-old Ruchika and think about what were the things that at that time, what did I really love to do? And reading was really what you know, helped me through those very difficult adolescent years. And I really returned to that. So I feel very, very grateful that I get to read, you know, some fiction that I will not name because then everybody will judge me. But then, you know.
Or we'll all be like, yep, same here. Yeah,
yeah, right. And so I think if all of us could really think about, you know, when we were children, there's this, you know, wisdom that we're then taught to sort of, you know, almost take off, like it's like almost like a jacket or a coat, and then you're supposed to take it off and just put it to the side while you pursue goals and, you know, whatnot. And I wonder if all of us, if we could really think about what was that thing when we were young that would, as you know, that we would like do because we were innocent and we just didn't know any better, right? And reading is one of those things where obviously it's really good for you and there's so much research for why it is, but I really never made the time to read for myself. I would read this book because everyone's talking about it. So
and I'm hearing like rekindling passions, right? That's a beautiful way to spark more energy and, you know, to be able to practice resilience. What a great example. So again, in your workbook, for those who are watching, think about the practices you're seeing in the chat that you've heard from our panelists, some things you've tried, and jot those down. And then, you know, some of these are especially necessary, like they never have been before during this time of social distancing. So double down on something. Put something on the right side column that you are going to double down on after you leave here today. That's going to help you practice the resilience you need. And one thing I love about you know, in recent days, we've talked more about what we can do for ourselves and self-care. And at the same time, like Fran talked about, connection is so important. And recently, a colleague of mine in Western Europe pointed out that all these articles, you know, she's reading on the American perspective about how to get through this time, is very individualistic.
Yes.
And it is a very American approach to surviving the pandemic. And so one question I have for anybody who has the spirit move them to answer, but also I know Fran may have some thoughts on this as well. As we look at the burdens we face as individuals, where do you see opportunities to change the systems we are a part of, or to look to our community for support instead of bearing it all on ourselves individually?
I'm happy to share some perspective on this. So I think this idea of community is one that has been a really critical concept, especially for those of us in the US. And I operate in a company that is globally distributed. We're in 25 countries, and I regularly have conversations with our Asian colleagues or our European colleagues about what is going on in the United States. Why can't you all get this pandemic under control? And so much of it is related to our individualistic tendencies. Like, I can't even believe at times that wearing masks is controversial and an infringement on individual rights, but we'll set that aside for a moment. One of the things that I feel we've done well as a company is really create a sense of community for how we navigate through this pandemic together. And we all have different communities. And I will tell you that I don't necessarily think that our workforce felt like we were a community unto ourselves. So set aside the communities in our personal lives, because those have also gotten richer. But one of the things I think about is how we, for those of us in large, meaningful organizations that have societal impact, how we use that platform by both creating a sense of community inside and spurring people to action outside. And so through all of the difficulties of the pandemic, and particularly this summer's awakening around racial justice, we've taken that as an opportunity to mobilize our workforce and really activate people to volunteer in their communities. We're very much activating people to vote in this election and creating space for them to do so. And we allow dialogue on these important topics in our internal channels, ensuring it's respectful and inclusive of lots of different points of view. But we're recognizing that the employer or the corporation has a meaningful role to play in this. And so that's been a really interesting evolution for how we think about our people at the company. And I would encourage you all to think about, especially if you're in a socially relevant company, how you use that platform for good.
I couldn't agree more. I think we have to show up as corporations, since we got personhood status, so a few years ago, and so I think we have to show up. I think we have to be there and participate, not only for our employees but for our customers and for our community, and being good stewards of community. And a couple of efforts that I'm really proud of that our team put together is we did an outreach to the frontline workers, and we were giving away, I think it was 500 pair, and we launched it and thought it would be a few days, and they were gone in a matter of hours. And so we did it again the next day, and we've got some of those stories and some of the feedback that we got. We had people share what is your job as a frontline worker. So we've got stories on our website of people that are either grocery store workers or in the military or working in the hospitals and stuff like that. That was really wonderful. And then as we were building out all our plans for the year and best laid plans, right? So we were going to do this awesome Pride push and had a lot of great stories and content around that. And of course, George Floyd was murdered. And so it was like a hold back, and we, stop spending on social, and what are we going to do as good citizens? And so we were very happy to be able to make a $50,000 donation to the Black Lives Matter various organizations, 5 different organizations. And so that was really important to us, for me and Naomi personally, as the co-founders, but also for the company and our employees. And so it's really, it's a permeation throughout.
Yeah.
That is a really important aspect that's backed by research, that giving of ourselves to others, when it's connected to a sense of purpose, like Tiffany talked about at the beginning, is so fulfilling and rewarding. So that's beautiful. And yeah, like talking about, you said something, I want you to repeat it if you can remember, Mala, about something from the inside, taking action on the outside. You know, what brings us together on the inside, you know, hopefully inspiring action on the outside. This is awesome. I have another question I want to ask, and I'll ask Ruchika this question. Speaking of Tiffany Dufu, who kicked off this conference, and her book, Drop the Ball, which I'm a huge fan of, I just want to share some recent data that was shared by the U.S. Labor Department, that just in September, 865,000 women over age 20 dropped out of the American workforce, compared to 216,000 men in the same age group. So 4 times as many women. Further, the Labor Department finds, and I'm sure we all find, married mothers do almost double the amount of household chores and parenting as married fathers. What would you say to working mothers who are enduring and maybe also feel like they're at a breaking point? And also recognizing that everyone's going to have to make a choice, and it is okay to make the choice best for you. I'm just curious, Ruchika, what is your experience of this?
Well, I'm a married mother, and I have had a really, really hard time. So not only am I personally feeling sort of consistent with the data, you know, sometimes I'm just like, I'm just going to shut everything down. I'm an entrepreneur, and sometimes I'm like, can I just even go on? I'm currently working on a book that's the manuscript is due in 3.5 weeks. So that has been really challenging. I was on a podcast talking about the numbers, which are frightening. I mean, you know, 865,000 women is just incredible. And
in 1 month.
In 1 month, it should be alarming. You know, I called it, you know, a human rights issue, but I also think it's going to really be a challenge to our democracy if we find, you know, so many women dropping out of the workforce. So I see it from 2 sides. One is, I really think leaders and managers who are especially on this call, really need to think about how can you create psychological safety for women on your teams, right? And especially for women to really speak up and say, here's what I'm dealing with. Here's, you know, how can we get ahead of this challenge, right, in some way, right? Does that mean, do we push back deadlines? Do we sort of renegotiate when things are due? And again, not in a sort of benevolent sexism way, not like, oh, here's this project, but I know you can't do it, but more sort of, you can say no. Like, where are you on this? You know, I've been working with some organizations that are rethinking their performance review process at this time, and really specifically ensuring that they're not going to, you know, ding people who need to take more time off, or who actually are, you know, struggling with various different challenges. And I think creating psychological safety for that is really important from the point of view of leaders. And there's a lot more I can say about that, but I don't want to hog the space on that. From a personal standpoint, I think I want to say that this was in the notes. So I think, Mala, you talked about recontracting and contracting. I read this excellent book on this concept. Oh gosh, the name is escaping me. I promise I will remember it and put it in the chat. But it's basically about how it's really important with your partner, and the researcher looked specifically, Jen Petriglieri specifically looked at, it's called, I think, Couples at Work. So she specifically looked at married heterosexual couples, but essentially her research found that, you know, couples that are where both parties are working, it's really, really important to contract during very big moments in your life, and contract when you're going through a big challenge, right? So often couples, they'll have their first contract when they, you know, first get together, whether they decide to marry or have like some partnership. And then after that, many will not revisit the details of that contract. And at a time like this, you really do need to recontract, right? You really need to sit down and say, this is the amount of work that I typically do.
Yeah.
And now that all of our systems have been blown apart, how do we recontract? So that for me has like personally worked. You know, at the beginning of this, we were in a very different situation. And now 7 months down, my husband and I have really worked together to recontract so that at least I don't feel overwhelmed on that side.
I also think as women and moms, we have to get over this idea that we have to do it all, right? And I had a really interesting story. A fairly senior woman at EA, when we were, she and I live in the same town, and we were faced with this idea that our kids are not going to go back to school. This is over the summer. And we were all panicked about how we're going to deal with this. And she sent me a Slack message one day, and she's like, I broke and I did it. I ended up hiring somebody. I'm not going to like let a lot of people know that. And she almost felt guilt about it, right? And I was like, her name is Jody. And I said, Jody, you should not for a moment feel any sense of guilt because you want to continue your career at the pace that you have. It is totally okay. Outsource away to the extent that you can, even if it includes flying in your mother-in-law for a few months, right? I don't know. So many of us have gotten to this place where we feel like we always have to show up like we got it under control. We don't have it under control. And one of the things I've coached our executives, including our most senior executives on, is do not show up to these Zoom calls like you're perfect and your life is perfect and that you've got it all under control. Because then it sets an example for people that, oh, well, clearly they can manage it, so why aren't you able to manage it? We have financial means the more senior we become. And the good news is our leaders are showing up vulnerable. Like their kids interrupt meetings and they have to like go off video to run and deal with a crisis in the house. And I think that kind of modeling, role modeling. So for those of you who are either senior leaders or you have the ability to coach and influence senior leaders, this showing up is really, really important. And the second thing I would just say is it's really important to be checking in with the women in your workforce about what's going on for them. And it's not okay to just say, how are you? You have to make it really a specific question because people don't feel like they can just tell you about all the messiness that's happening in their lives right now. Ask specific questions like, how are things going at home? How are the kids doing? Like be that invested in your people that you actually know what's going on for them. Because I will tell you, I had a woman on a partner team that supports me confide in me that she's going to have to leave the workforce because she has 2 kids, one with special needs, and she and her husband had that conversation. And of course, the gender roles are pervasive. They decided that she's the one that needed to step back. And so she thought she had to leave the company. And my response to her is, you don't have to leave the company. Let's figure out another role for you. If you need to go part-time for a while, let's figure that out. If you need to take a leave of absence, let's figure that out. It is not and does not have to be a binary decision. So I encourage you to find the flexible ways in which moms who are making that choice can still stay connected with your company, because this too shall pass. And you want to make sure that the way you treat them in this moment is the thing that's going to inspire them to return when that moment passes.
Yeah, I'm hearing a strong theme around contracting and recontracting. And be creative when you do that. Be creative and think about what's possible, which actually is the transition I want to make, is this Buddhist philosophy, and it's true in religions around the world, the concept of impermanence. And when you really embrace impermanence, you allow yourself to think about what's possible. So I would ask everybody to tap your sort of inner creator, inner creative essence, and think about what you see as opportunities to be seized in this moment. What is possible for us that wasn't before? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I feel like you've touched on
Fran,
it. Can you hear me? Yeah, I feel like you've touched on a lot. I think we've all touched on a lot of things that that we can do in terms of just showing up and being present and trying to find ways to get on that bike and do the exercise. But I also think that we have to be gentle with ourselves and not try too much. I don't think anyone on this call would be here if they weren't a bit of an overachiever and, like me, a compassionate control freak. And so, it's hard. It's really hard, but these are just reminders of not sweating the small stuff and just focusing on the top 3 priorities, and they can shift. And so, it sounds like we're all being very kind and thoughtful about others. And I think that we've got to keep that focus on ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful.
You can't pour from an empty cup is the thing I say again and again and again. I'll give you an example. When I was asked to do this podcast early this week, I was so unwell. I could actually, I was like barely getting out of bed. And there was a part of me that said, well, I already said yes, so I have to do it. And I really wish I had thought to myself, like I'd really given myself the grace. In some ways, I feel like I give the grace to everyone else, and then I don't do it to myself. So that's something I really want to continue working on. And if there's anything this pandemic has really brought to the fore, is just that, like, you really cannot pour from an empty cup.
Yeah. You also bring to mind for me the Brené Brown permission slip. Lots of permission slips right now. I mean, I'm writing myself lots of permission slips. Can't, pandemic, can't, social distancing, it really does, like Fran said, lets you focus in on those priorities. So I want to give Mala a chance to add anything else, and then we'll take, Kylie can tell us how long we have for questions, but Mala, do you want to chime in as well? No, I think she's muted.
Sorry, I'm finding that I'm operating with a just-in-time mindset, right? So I'm not putting pressure on myself that I have to think about what the company is going to be doing 2 to 3 years from now. It's actually okay to focus on the now. It's okay. And so I've even said to my team, I was like, if this is not something I need to respond to or focus on 2 weeks from now, I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to focus on what are the most immediate things that really require my time, my attention, and unblock people from doing what they need to do, including in my household, by the way. And so I think that permission to really, you've all said this, that permission to truly prioritize. And one of the other gifts this pandemic has given us is, I used to put a lot of pressure on myself to kind of maintain relationships, or maintain friendships, make sure that we're scheduling that time. And not all friendships are created equally. Not all of them are cup filling, not, even relationships in your life. And so I'm also giving myself to let go. I said to my husband the other day, it's like, that couple we've been trying to really become really good friends with, and we keep investing. We haven't really heard from them. Maybe it's time to let that go. And it's just like move one more thing off of the plate. So I find that's working for me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'm curious if anyone from wants to, or any of our participants, anyone watching wants to put a question in the chat. And then Kylie, can you tell us how long we have for questions? Since we got started a little late. All right, a lot of comments I can see.
Looks like we have until 11:15 or 11:20 for questions.
Oh, great. We've got time for questions, people. Add them in here. Definitely seeing that things are resonating. The fierce prioritization is a good takeaway. I'm just waiting to see. Oh, alone time. Man, what a great question. How are you creating alone time for yourself? Who wants to answer this?
Mala, I just wanted to, before we jump to this, I want to really double down and say again, like really for all of us who can take relationships off our plate right now. Like there is really no time like the present. And I sorry, I really struggle with people pleasing syndrome. And, like need to make everyone happy, need to check in. Oh, it was so-and-so's dog's birthday. I better send them a text. Like I'm one of those. And now it's time to, say like, no, this relationship isn't serving me. And this year has really brought that to the fore. So really, when we think about permission slips, I think that's one thing that I like. If I could really tape it by the side of my bed, it would be like you do you. Like this is the year you do you. And in that way, I think that's how I'm creating alone time for myself. It means like that mental headspace where I've always been like, oh, I must be a better, friend, wife, daughter, sister, like, mother, blah, blah, blah. Like this is the year where I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah, I think for many of us, life has felt like a hamster wheel. I know I'll speak for myself, pre-pandemic, hamster wheel, right? Hamster wheel of the kids' activities, hamster wheel of the relationships, hamster wheel of the work stuff. And it's like a violent pause to that hamster wheel, right? And so now this whole idea, and sometimes in business we do zero-based budgeting. What if post-pandemic it's like zero-based life, right? You actually just rebuild and add back things that truly are meaningful to you, that truly fill your cup, that truly are the healthy, fulfilling kinds of relationships. On alone time's hard. What I've been doing is solitary walks and just through the neighborhood. And I'll tell you, I feel like those little bits of moments, sometimes there's 5 of us in this house plus a couple of pets. And sometimes I just need to be outside and by myself in the fresh air. And that has been really rejuvenating. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, and Mala, I'll add on, this isn't alone time, but how many people I have been working with who are like, I'm not going to be on Zoom. I'm going to be out for a walk while I'm on this call. So that is that idea of getting out and getting the fresh air, like that can even be done while you're on meetings too, to some degree. But yeah, alone time, other ideas for this?
I have a funny story. My wife and I founded this company over 7 years ago. And so we have shared the same, 10 feet of square space for a very long time. And, in every office that we've had, we shared an office. We, obviously vacation, spend all of our time together. And so it was a couple of months into the pandemic and we were sitting upstairs. We have a room that has kind of matching chairs and we were both sitting there for all these meetings. And I realized that we had a guest room that we weren't going to be using for some time. So I got rid of the pull-out couch and moved the desk in here and, was setting up an office and we got it all set up and I'm sitting here and then she came down and started sitting beside me and I was like, I don't want you in there. so then we got up and we started looking throughout the house to try and find another space. And now she's got the best office in the house. So we made it work and we have 2 different spaces and it's really fun because it's like, okay, see you tonight. And we go into our space or we might, see each other for lunch. Exactly. Going to work. I got my lunch bucket and then we have more to talk about at the end of the day instead of eavesdropping on each other's conversations all day. So it's been good, but it's funny because it had never crossed our mind to do that. And it took a couple of months of seated side by side and to be in there. So that's how we're getting some alone time.
That's a great story. I want to ask another question that came up in the chat. Is anyone a multitasker by nature, but has found their multitasking way out of control as work and home life are more intertwined? I have heard the phrase, instead of work from home, live from work. And that seems to resonate. But anyone want to comment on multitasking gone out of control?
I mean, this is me to a T. So I think, the more reading I'm doing on it, it's definitely a sign of the anxiety, a little bit of the grief. Like all of that, like where can we have control in our life? Oh, there's no control because everything is so unpredictable. So let's just, do everything at the same time. I wish I had a great piece of advice. I don't. The one thing that has really helped me, and I also saw a question around social media, and it's actually really like limiting my social media time and putting my phone away in a drawer when I'm doing other things. And I found that to be two things that have helped me a little bit. Definitely pulling back on the social media for me was really helpful, because otherwise I was like, oh, let me engage in all these conversations. Let me add another thing to my plate. So that helped. I think walks definitely. Yeah, I'd love to hear other people's advice on this.
One of the things, so on the social media question, so I lurk, but I don't post. And I like staying connected with, I've lived all over the world, and so I have friends and colleagues from all over the world, and I like just seeing what's up with them, but I don't post because I don't want to get into all the divisive conversations that are happening. And one of the things I found myself doing, because there's so much going on in the world, is in between meetings, I check what's going on in the news. What are the news stories, right? And then at the end of a busy day, I would engage in, have you all heard the term doom scrolling? Where I got into this really bad habit where at the end of the day, when I'm winding down for the evening, the doom scrolling would start. And I'd read all the articles about what was going on over the course of the day, and I'd pop into social media, and then I try to go to sleep. And then I was wondering why my witching hour was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'd just wake up and be awake for sometimes 60 or 90 minutes and have my brain going and not being able to get back to sleep. If you're doing that, my biggest recommendation to you is stop. Just stop. Because I think it's critically important to fill your psyche with just positive news right now, because all of the negativity out there is incredibly overwhelming, and it affects you physiologically. And so that was my big realization a couple of months ago. And so I've now changed that, and I'm sleeping much better.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're reminding me of a Hidden Brain podcast episode that I'm particularly fond of by Shankar Vedanta. And the episode is When Passion Isn't Enough. And it's about consuming news media. And when you are consuming news, are you doing it to compel you to some sort of action? Are you going to do something with the information you are consuming? Apply it to something? And if the answer is no, I'm just entertaining myself right now, the idea is to insert a pause and say, is this the way I would like to be entertained right now? What emotions are coming up for me? What is this doing to my energy level? And is this the way I want to spend my time to entertain myself? And it gives you a choice, right? It breaks you out of that habit of the doom scrolling at the end of the day, because you get to be a little more honest with yourself about what you're doing in that moment. Any other thoughts on social media? The only other thing I'll add is, Mala, I've heard a statistic quoted that I have no idea how valid it is, but something like 90% of us are content consumers and only 10% are content creators. So I identify with you as a lurker, I guess. Are there other questions in the chat that I might have overlooked? Any of you see a question you want to answer? I'm not seeing another one. How about this? Let's go around and have each of you just close with some takeaways as you think about resilience right now. What are your parting thoughts for our audience? I'll have Ruchika go first.
I was going to say, Mala, do you want to go first? So I think the big parting thought is to give yourself and others grace. I think that's something that has been very hard for me as someone, again, all those labels, people pleaser, and someone who's a multitasker. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that we didn't really talk about, because it's such a short time which has flown by, is is there a way that you can lift while you I mean, climb is relative, but is there a way that you can be there and hold space for someone in some way that would be beneficial to them, and then and actually by that definition it would then be also beneficial to you? And for me, that's been, recommending, especially, younger women of color, mentoring younger women of color where possible, and just thinking about what are ways that I can be helpful. And that also then helps me stop getting up in my own head about all the things I'm not doing, right? So that's a small takeaway that for me has been beneficial.
Yeah, I would just add that I think it's important to plan something each week or whatever cadence makes sense to you that is something you truly look forward to. And I recognize that all the things we normally used to do that would be cup filling, maybe not accessible to us. But whether it is, an hour to watch your favorite TV show, we too, as a family, are getting into Schitt's Creek. We kind of like the barrier to profanity and let the kids watch it. They're going to learn those words anyway. They're going to learn those words anyway. Best they hear it when we're around, right? But whether it's like family afternoon to binge watch something, or my middle son and I have been really getting into baking, which is counterproductive to the exercise I mentioned early in the panel. We're digging up a lot of like heritage recipes from our culture and kind of teaching ourselves how to do those. Or this weekend, we're going to go to the kitty shelter to consider adopting a second kitty cat. And so each week we plan something as a family, which is the thing that we're going to look forward to, how we spend time on the weekend. And I don't know, I feel like that gets me through, like, count the days of the week in my brain of, okay, we're going to have a weekend and here are the fun things we're going to do over the weekend. I'm finding that as a really good source of building resilience and perseverance.
Yeah, there's a wonderful video of Michelle Obama addressing a crowd talking about plan your joy. We plan everything else in our lives, but we need to plan our joy too. And that's what I'm hearing from you. And it's so true. Yeah, good luck with that second kitty cat, by the way. Fran, how about for you? What are your closing thoughts?
Yeah, well, we went with a new puppy. So that we've got a 4-month-old puppy, and she brings great joy and delight on a daily basis. And so, yeah, finding those moments, but also knowing that we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this, and there are a lot of lessons. There are a lot of aha moments. We're getting to know ourselves better. We're getting to know our family better. And there's a lot of takeaway from that, with that. And even how to deal with uncertainty and anxiety. And, it's just a real reminder, it's important to stay grounded and know we will get through it. And there's a lot of good stuff coming with it. So it's not all bad. Reach out to those good friends, and hold your puppy tight.
And with that, I just want to say thank you again to our panelists today. Thank you to everyone for showing up to this session and hanging in there while we got ourselves set up. I saw that Kylie had set up a poll, with the different comments that we're hearing in 2020. And I feel like I ran through all of those at the beginning of this session. Is this thing on? But this turned out to be such a phenomenal conversation. So grateful for all of you spending your time today, sharing your ideas and your thoughts and inspiring us to be more resilient during this time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy to be here.
Be well.
Hang in there.
Yeah.
We'll get through this together.
Yeah.